Bern, the last couple of weeks we've been talking about closing the sale. And you mentioned something last week that really intrigued me. You said that sometimes we need to ask for 3 favors.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's, this is an interesting thing. I got into selling in 1955 as a dysfunctional accommodator. In other words, I had trouble working, and then when I did, I kept running into people who would say, let me think it over. And that seemed logical to me. I mean, that's a nice thing, so you accommodate that. And they said, now, you come by on the first of the month, and I'll be sure to buy it. You can count on that. And I'd go by, and they wouldn't even let me get in. And I was pretty conscious of what was going on, and I kept agreeing to go back, to go back, to go back. And honestly, Gina, I can't remember ever selling a back call. Probably made a couple hundred. Slow learner. You know, I mean, it took me a while. This just isn't working. And then I noticed that a few people made an occasional sale on a back call, but they weren't 1 out of 3. They were like 1 out of 10, 1 out of 20 would buy on a back call. Now, the reason for this, of course, is that a quality diminishes and the price increases in the minds of the prospect once you're out of sight. I mean, when you're right there and you create this excitement and the aura about the product and you're there to answer their questions, well, the excitement is pretty high, But there's a natural tendency for the person to want to postpone, procrastinate making the decision for fear of making a mistake or something else coming up. And so you understand that, and so you say, okay, we'll check back. It was about, I guess, 6 or 7 years of that, and I'm embarrassed to admit to that, but I was making back calls. And I decided, well, I'm not going to make back calls anymore, because even if you were selling 1 out of 5, it takes just as long to sell a back call as it does a first call. So if I can sell 1 out of 3 first calls, why would I make back calls? I mean, it's just illogical. But it wasn't 1 out of 5, it wasn't 1 out of 10, it wasn't 1 out of 20, it was 1 out of hundreds.
Oh, my goodness.
That weren't really buying. And so I decided, well, I just wasn't going to make back calls anymore. And the consideration would come up, and I'd say, well, I understand how you must feel, but I just don't do back calls. Well, they'd get upset, and you know what I mean? So it didn't seem fair to tell them at the end if I wasn't going to come back. So I decided I'd tell them when.
At the beginning.
At the beginning of a call.
Why waste your time?
Yeah, that I wasn't going to come back. Now, you just can't say it that way. So I began to write a thing that I call the 3 favors. And I know what my intention was, but I wrote these things up, and I started using them, and they didn't work at all.
Oh, really?
And so I got confused about it, and I finally found a FOGG formula, F-O-G-G. It's a formula that you can plug in the number of words in a sentence and sentences in a paragraph and determine the grade level that you wrote it at, okay?
Oh.
And it turned out it was like 12th or 13th grade level. And so, which is, too complex for the average person who is used to reading a newspaper or, a novel, which usually is written about 7th or 8th grade level. So I, fogged it down. I got it down and chopped the sentences up and what have you, and finally came up with a thing that I call the 3 favors, and started using them, and I couldn't believe the difference, couldn't believe the result. And what I'm going to do is going to run through this with you, and I'm going to do the 3 favors. And listen very carefully to them and see where we're going with this. This was, by the way, after I had prospected, established rapport, correlated the product and service, and decided that I was going to move forward with the presentation. Okay. What I would do is I'd say, Gina, I really thank you for working with me up to this point in time, but based on your response and your attitudes and what have you, I feel compelled to move forward and explain our product and how it might apply to you. May I do that? May I do that?
Sure. You may.
Yeah, and I wouldn't ask them unless they'd say yes. I don't think I've ever had them say no. And I said, before I get into it, though, I would like to ask you for 3 favors, none of which are to buy anything. Would that be all right?
Okay.
Okay. The first favor is that you please listen to and evaluate everything I say. And if you think for one moment that I've misrepresented or exaggerated or shaded the truth or perhaps stretched it a little, or if there's something you don't understand, or if you feel apprehensive about something, I'd like you to stop me right there. Would you do that?
You bet.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because if you don't, anything I'd said after that would be a waste of your time, wouldn't it? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so please, if you would. The second favor is that you please try to keep an open mind. You see, you and I both know that I can't sit here and sell you on something that you don't need, don't want, and can't afford. Isn't that right?
Of course.
Yeah, and that's not my job.
Right.
That's not my job. What I'd like to do, however, is to explain this product and how its benefits might apply to you. And if you're as enthusiastic about it as we are, once you understand it, we'll invite you to participate. But I promise I'm not going to do or say anything that will embarrass or annoy you. Does that sound fair enough?
Sure.
Okay. And the third favor is that you please, please not embarrass me by asking me to come back later. You know, like tomorrow or next week, next month, or maybe even next year. Now, don't misunderstand me. I know I'd enjoy coming back for a visit and a cup of coffee if you'd have me. It's just that I'm committed to a policy that prohibits me from coming back into your home again with my application and materials and what have you, or meeting you at a coffee shop or anything like that. In other words, the principal reason for this is to avoid any possibility of harassment. So what I like to do is go ahead and explain the product, answer your questions as honestly and candidly as I can, and expect that you'll either say, Bern, this is wonderful, it's something we want for our family, or, Bern, no, this just isn't my cup of tea. And either way would be 100% okay with me. Would you do that?
So you're giving them permission to say no.
Yes. Now, what I've just done, in truth, is to give them all the authority. I give it all to them. I ask them to listen and evaluate and challenge. I ask them to try to keep an open mind. I admitted that I couldn't sell them something. See, here's what's happening. I gave them all the authority. Typically, people aren't used to having it, so what do? They give it back. They give it back. It's amazing. And if they don't, it's okay. And if they do, it's okay. See, either way it works, 100%. It's incredible. My closing ratios went from 1 out of 3 to like 8 out of 10. I've had some sales experiences where I went as much as 3 years with a product and never missed a sales call. But I was a good prospector. And when I made that presentation, I had a pretty good idea that they could afford it, they would benefit by it certainly, and that I had the authority and the ability sitting in front of me to make a decision. But with those 3 favors, what's really fascinating is that oftentimes at the end of a call, they would say, well, out of habit, they would say, well, I tell you what, I really like this and everything, but I would like to have a chance to think it over and like to have you come back the first of the month. And I'd have the spouse or a partner or something say, hey, no, you agreed not to do that, especially if they wanted to buy. You know what I'm saying? In other words, yeah. And so all I had to do was act embarrassed, and they would jump in and help clear that up for me.
Because they'd already had an agreement with you.
Yeah. And they would move forward. And now, if you use the 3 favors, and by the way, we'll embellish those and explain what's really going on there, but if you use the 3 favors, the only thing of it is you have to honor them.
Absolutely.
You cannot go back, no matter what the circumstances. And I've told people that if someone called me, say 2 or 3 weeks later, and said, Bern, we've thought about this, and we'd like to buy 10 sets, or whatever it is, whatever you're selling, that I would say, no, I'm sorry. Now, I'll have to send another agent by, and I'm sure you'll appreciate them and enjoy them, and they'll do a good job for you, but I'm not coming back. I would not go back. Because once you do, then that thing turns into a gimmick. It's not true anymore. You know what I'm saying? So there's a lot of power. Now, to use the 3 favors, you have to have confidence in your ability to communicate the idea, okay? But you don't have to have as much closing power, because that will take care of it.